Hi, this is Rebecca Morris, and I'm going to be reporting on bubonic plague today. Now, first off, bubonic plague comes from a gram-negative coccidioids bacteria called Yersinia pestis. Now, Yersinia pestis causes three types of plague. The first is pneumonic plague, which is the most virulent but the rarest of the plagues. It is an infection of the lungs. The second we'll be talking about is septicemic plague. This is an infection of the blood, which can be shown in this photo where the fingernails turn completely black. Third, we'll be talking about bubonic plague. Now, in bubonic plague, there is an occurrence where it goes to the lymphatic system and reaches the nearest lymph nodes, and then the bacteria multiplies. Once the bacteria is multiplied, the lymph node becomes tender, inflamed, and sore, which is shown in this photo. It normally occurs in the neck, thigh, or groin area, and they're called buboes, hence the name bubonic plague. This is the most common of the plagues, and this, of course, is what we'll be talking about for the rest of the report. So once I say Yersinia pestis, I am referring to bubonic plague. Bubonic plague contains a lipopolysaccharide endotoxin that allows it to protect itself from our immune system. It has a coagulase and a fibrinolysis. The flea contains a plasmid-encoding phospholipase D that allows Yersinia pestis to live inside the gut of the flea. So when it takes a bite of a rat or a feral dog or cat, and it takes in the blood from their system that contains the Yersinia pestis, it allows it to go through their system, but instead of being digested and gotten rid of, it's kept in their gut, and the bacteria stays in there, and it grows and it multiplies, and it creates this blockage phenomenon. And once the flea goes to feed again, normally on some form of human, it'll feed on the human, and it'll regurgitate the blood that it has inside of it, which has all of that bacteria, which contains almost 5,000 different bacteria that then goes back into the human and spreads to their system. This blockage doesn't occur, the flea will die of starvation, causing the disease not to be spread. And our immune response is very unhelpful when there are no antibiotics present, since it can't control the disease. Our immunity system has no way to produce it. It gets completely shut down. It prevents inflammation for protection and completely cuts off cell communication, not allowing for an ability to fight off the infection, unless, of course, we use common antibiotics, which will be explained later on. Now, with our understanding of the immunology and the pathogenesis, we can now see how it transmits. It transmits normally through rats, prairie dogs, squirrels, rabbits, cats, and dogs. Basically, feral animals in general are reservoirs of Yersinia pestis. And once they're in these animals, most likely how they're infecting humans is the flea will bite into the rat, and as I explained earlier, it grows, multiplies, regurgitates into a human, and that is how we get the disease. However, we can also get contact with contaminated tissues. Say you're to be in contact with a squirrel and cut it open, and there's Yersinia pestis, and you cut yourself and it gets to your system, you're going to contract the disease. That is the way. It's a zoonotic disease. It's a vector-borne illness. But one thing that's very interesting that most people don't know about bubonic plague is it's not transmitted well in cold weather. Most diseases like bubonic plague transmit well, and weather is less of an issue, but cold weather causes it not to be transmitted well. So when these different outbreaks have occurred, once winter comes along, it leads to a decline in that outbreak itself. And it's rare to transmit from human to human unless it's a form of pneumonic plague, and that'll cause droplets or coughing to another person will allow it to spread that way. Now, symptoms of bubonic plague are things such as fevers, headaches, chills, weakness, and most importantly, the swollen lymph node, which is known as the buboes. The disease takes about 2 to 5 days to incubate before system begins, so you can't really tell that the disease is coming until after a certain amount of time, and by then it's already spread to other people, which caused it to be such a huge outbreak, is because you don't know about it at the very beginning, and it's already beginning to be spread. To diagnose bubonic plague, most of the time what they have to do is take fluids from the buboes in for laboratory testing. So you have to identify the signs and the symptoms, and from there it has to be tested to make sure that it actually is bubonic plague. And for treatment, it can be actually common found antibiotics such as doxycycline, ciprofloxacin, and levofloxacin, which makes it very easy to cure the disease compared to back then when there were no antibiotics. However, there must be an early diagnosis for the disease to be prevented, because bubonic plague works pretty fast, and it is fatal, so it must be early diagnosed as to prevent death. When discussing bubonic plague, many people are interested in the history, since there's so much that occurred because of bubonic plague and the fatalities that have occurred in our past. There have been 3 major outbreaks of bubonic plague. The first was actually not the Black Death, it was the Justinian plague, and its origins were in China and northeast India, which then spread to the Byzantine Empire. The next was the Black Death, and this originated in the steppe region near the Caspian Sea, closer to southern Russia. In the photo next on the presentation, you can see a doctor who worked during the Black Death who wore those to try to protect from contamination. And the final outbreak was called the Modern Plague, or the Great Plague of Hong Kong, which occurred in Yunnan, which had around 24,000 cases with 90% fatality, which we won't be able to talk about due to time limits on this video. Now, the first outbreak was the Justinian Plague, which occurred from 542 AD to 750 AD. It was mainly bubonic, but a couple of septicemic and pneumonic cases were also in there, and it spread throughout the Byzantine Empire, beginning under the reign of Emperor Justinian I, as pictured in this photo. Its origins were in China, and it spread beginning in Egypt of the Byzantine Empire. It spread north to Alexandria and east to Palestine, and many people tried to recover from it with physicians and home treatment remedies, but overall, most people were unsuccessful due to the fact that there were lots of illness around, and they were in the middle of a war, so it caused 25% of the population to die, and around possibly 25 to 50 million people. The numbers are still unsure, and that was 5,000 deaths per day in Constantinople alone. The effects of this plague led to the Byzantine Empire's decline because they were able to be attacked by the Lombards, and they were able to succeed because of the lack of people and the sickness in the area. Now, this is a map of what occurred during the Justinian Plague in the Byzantine Empire. As you can see, it started in the Red Sea and originated here in Egypt, and it spread elsewhere across the Byzantine Empire, having outbreaks shown by these little asterisks, spreading all across Europe. When most people think of bubonic plague, they think of the Black Death, which occurred in medieval times between the period of 1346 to 1353. It killed 2/3 of Europe's population, which is around 50 million people at the time. And since there was no sanitation and no understanding of how diseases were spread, it spread absolutely everywhere. And since there was an incubation period of 2 to 5 days, no one had known what hit them until it was already too late. It took around 8 weeks for a good city to understand the fact that they were completely infected with this disease, since it was very easy to get. Since the rats spread the disease and the fleas bit people, and it's very common, especially in poorer areas with illness already present. If one family member got the disease, most likely the rest of the family got it. Strangely enough, more people got the disease in countrysides rather than in urban areas, since the disease was spread primarily by rats. It had huge significance on history and the consequences of countries all over Europe, since so many people died, leaving countries weak, being able to be conquered by others. Also, the plague itself had some geographical conquest. It was able to have an outbreak even in Russia, where most military conquests completely fail. And here's an excerpt from a Florin poet speaking about the plague. All the citizens did little else except to carry dead bodies to be buried. At every church they dug deep pits down to the water table, and thus those who were poor who died during the night were bundled up quickly and thrown into the pit. In the morning, when a large number of bodies were found in the pit, they took some earth and shoveled it down on top of them, and later others were placed on top of them, and then another layer of earth, just as one makes lasagna with layers of pasta and cheese. This just shows the dire consequences of this disease on the population of Europe at the time. As mentioned earlier, the Caspian Sea was considered one of the origin points for the Black Death in areas of Russia, so it was able to spread from here and started spreading all over Europe thanks to rats storing away in ships and being spread across the countries. And as you can also note, that's very interesting, is that the border between the Golden Horde actually protected this area for a very long time until 1353, when it spread through the rest of Europe and then finally reached here and was one of the ending points of the plague. It's funny to look at this map because it looks almost like a war has been taking over Europe and they're spreading across the conquest of Europe. And you have to know it's bubonic plague, destroying 2/3 of the population. Since the last major outbreak of bubonic plague was during the Great Plague of Hong Kong, which ended in 1904, there hasn't been any major outbreaks since then. The last WHO outbreak that was recorded was in 2004 in Madagascar, which was much smaller in numbers. There hasn't been many cases in the United States, which CNN reported 14 cases overall in the United States in 2015. The areas of at-risk populations are Madagascar, Peru, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which you'll be able to see in maps I will show you later on. The future outlooks for research for bubonic plague is to look into the past to discover the effects of the disease back then, how to better contain contamination, and how to and determine how many deaths occurred over the years because of bubonic plague. And they're also trying to make a successful vaccine, since the vaccines they've had tried in the past have not been efficient, and they're working together to create a better and possible vaccine to give to people for bubonic plague. Now, as you can see in this map provided by the CDC, you can see there's a prevalence of bubonic plague in the western side of the United States. In the statistical bar graph, you can see that there are very few cases that even occur in the United States. And when they do, there are very few deaths that occur, thanks to the fact that there are common antibiotics available, and there's always early diagnosis available to people here in the United States. Across the country, however, there's still not that many cases available compared to the outbreaks that have occurred in our time. As you can see in this area of Africa, where Congo and Madagascar are located, there is a huge prevalence and increase in bubonic plague compared to the rest of the world, showing this is the most at-risk population. And thank you very much for watching. Here are my citations. Can't wait to hear your questions. Thank you.